I didn't even look at her. That was the part Amara Bell would never be able to forget. Not the words, not the cold air in that hospital room, not the sound of her newborn sons breathing in their bassinets. It was the fact that Kang Seojun walked through that door, swept his eyes across the room like he was conducting a security assessment, and then looked directly past her. Like she was furniture. Like 14 hours of labor and 2 new lives and 3 years of marriage had reduced her to something he needed to work around. She had just pushed 2 human beings into the world. She hadn't slept in 2 days. There was still an IV line taped to the back of her hand, and the man she married looked at her like she was a problem he hadn't scheduled time for. "Don't touch me." Those were the first words he said. Not to her, at her. Directed at the nurse who moved to hand him one of the infants. He said it like the baby was something that might contaminate him. Amara felt something crack open in her chest. Not break. She didn't have the energy to break yet, just crack. Like the first split in ice before the whole surface gives. If you've ever loved someone and watched them choose everything else over you, drop a like and tell me what city you're watching from. I read every single comment, and I want to know how far this story has traveled. And if you're new here, subscribe and stay until the end. You will not see this ending coming. The maternity suite on the 14th floor of Yonsei Premier Hospital was the kind of room that cost more per night than most people's monthly rent. Floor-to-ceiling windows, fresh orchids on the credenza, a dedicated nursing station just outside the door. Seojun had reserved it 6 months ago, back when things between them were still something that could be called functional. Back when he still came home before midnight. Back when Amara would wake up to find him standing over her in the dark, watching her sleep with an expression she could never quite read. Something between possession and something that might have been tenderness, if she'd let herself believe that. She had stopped letting herself believe things somewhere around month 7 of the pregnancy. The room smelled like antiseptic and cut flowers, and the particular exhaustion that comes after you've survived something your body told you it couldn't. Amara was sitting up in the bed with both boys arranged against her. The larger one, who she'd already decided she was calling Kai, nested against her left side, and the smaller one, who didn't have a name yet because she'd been waiting to name him with Seojun, tucked against her right. The smaller one had arrived 40 minutes after his brother, face scrunched and fists clenched, fighting from the first second. She had looked at that baby and thought, he knows something. The door had opened without a knock. Seojun never knocked. In 3 years, she couldn't remember him once knocking on a door in any room he considered his territory. The hospital suite counted. He walked in with 2 men she recognized. His head of personal security, Park Junho, and someone new, someone she'd never seen before, which was the first wrong thing. Seojun did not bring unknowns into rooms where she was. That had been a rule, one of the few rules she'd actually trusted. He was wearing a dark charcoal suit, which meant he'd come from somewhere formal. There was a small cut along his jawline, the kind that comes from shaving too fast, from rushing. She noticed these details the way she'd trained herself to notice them over 3 years, cataloging, reading him like a document she was always 2 translations behind on. He stopped about 6 feet inside the door. His eyes went to the bassinets first, not to her. "Are they healthy?" he said. Not a question, a checklist item. "Both of them," she said. "2 boys. They're both here." "I was informed." He said it without moving toward her, without moving toward the bassinets either. Just standing there, Junho and the unknown man bracketing him like furniture. Amara kept her voice even. She was good at keeping her voice even. She had gotten very good at it. "Do you want to hold them?" That was when the nurse, a young woman who hadn't been working this ward long enough to read the room correctly, made the mistake of stepping forward with the smaller twin, holding him out towards Seojun in the universal gesture of "Here, isn't he wonderful?" "Don't touch me." The nurse froze. The baby made a small sound. Amara looked at her husband's face and found nothing in it she recognized. "Sir," the nurse started, "step back." He wasn't loud. He was never loud. That was the thing about Seojun. He never raised his voice because he'd never needed to. The volume was in the stillness. "I said step back." The nurse stepped back. Amara reached out and took the baby from her with one arm, pressing him against her chest. "You can go," she told the nurse quietly. "Give us a minute." The room was very quiet after the nurse left. Seojun turned his eyes to Amara, finally. and she wished, for a half-second, that he hadn't. There was nothing warm in that look, nothing soft, just calculation. The same expression he wore in board meetings, in the moments before decisions were made that other men would spend years recovering from. "You'll be moved," he said. She heard the words, processed them, said carefully, "I'm sorry?" "The main estate is not the appropriate location right now. I've arranged temporary accommodation. You and the children will be moved within the next 48 hours. Amara stared at him. She had prepared herself for a lot of things. She had spent the last 3 months preparing herself, specifically, for the ways Seojin might handle fatherhood badly. She had made contingency plans. She had built things quietly, methodically, the way she'd built everything in her life after leaving Atlanta with nothing but a scholarship and a suitcase. She had not prepared herself for this. For him standing 6 feet away with their sons in her arms and telling her she was being moved like a piece of furniture he'd decided to put in storage. "Moved," she said, "temporarily. You're telling me 40 minutes after I—" She stopped, breathed, started again. "40 minutes after I gave birth to your sons. You're telling me we're being relocated. It's a security matter." "It is not a security matter." Something shifted in his expression. Not much. A slight tightening around the eyes. "There are elements within the organization that view the current situation as a point of vulnerability." "The current situation," she repeated. "Our children." Don't." She said it quietly. She didn't have to be loud either. She'd learned that from him, actually. The way stillness could carry more weight than volume. "Don't say my name like that. Like you're managing me." He looked at her for a long moment, and she waited. She was always waiting with him, always looking for the thing underneath the mask, the thing she'd glimpsed in those early months when he'd sat across from her in a restaurant in New York and talked for 3 hours without looking at his phone, when he'd shown up at her office door in the rain with no explanation and taken her hand and said simply, "Let's go." When he'd held her at 2 a.m. after the miscarriage they'd never talked about since, held her so tightly she'd thought he might be afraid of something too. She waited for that person. He said, "It's the safest option available." She understood then that she was alone in a way she hadn't fully understood before. "Get out," she said. "Amara, get out." Still quiet, still even. The ice wasn't cracking anymore. It was just cold all the way through. "I'll cooperate with whatever arrangements you've made, but I need you to leave this room, right now." Park Junho had the grace to look at the floor. Seojun held her gaze for another 3 seconds. Then he turned and walked out. The door swung shut behind him with the soft, expensive click of well-engineered hinges. Amara sat in the silence holding both her sons and did not cry. She made herself breathe. She made herself feel the weight of them, the warmth, the slight twitch of the smaller one's fingers against her arm. She had known, on some level, that this marriage was not built on solid ground. She had known it and chosen it anyway, because nothing in her life had been built on solid ground, and she had learned to make things work in the space between what she was given and what she needed. But there is a difference between knowing something intellectually and having it walk into a maternity suite in a charcoal suit and tell you that you are a security liability. She looked down at the baby she hadn't named yet. "I'm going to figure this out," she told him. "I promise you that." He opened his eyes. Dark, unfocused, ancient-looking the way all newborn eyes are, looking at nothing and somehow directly at her. She believed her own words because she had to. By morning, the story had already started moving through the Osung organization's lower ranks, the way things always moved in that world, sideways and underground, through phone calls in parking garages and conversations in restaurant kitchens that the owners preferred not to know about. The heir of the Osung dynasty had attended the birth of his children and left without touching either of them. He had not been photographed holding them. He had not issued a family announcement. In any other family, this would have been personal. In the Kong family, it was political. Amara understood this. She had learned the grammar of Seojun's world the way she'd learned Korean, imperfectly, through immersion, by making enough mistakes to eventually stop making the most dangerous ones. She understood that every action he took or failed to take was being watched and interpreted by people who had built their careers on reading the Kong family's internal weather. She also understood that by walking out of that room, Seojun had handed those people something. She had 48 hours. She used the first 2 of them to sleep, because she was not going to make any decisions running on adrenaline and blood loss. She slept with both boys tucked beside her, one arm curved around each of them, and she dreamed about Atlanta, her mother's kitchen, the particular slant of afternoon light through a window with a broken blind, the smell of her brother Marcus burning toast. When she woke up, she felt clearer. She made 3 phone calls. The nurses who had been in and out of the room all morning found her sitting upright, IV removed. She'd had a nurse take it out at 6 a.m., phone in hand, speaking in a quiet, precise voice in a mixture of English and Korean that was better than anyone on Seo-jun's staff had been told to expect. The first call was to a woman named Ji Yeon, who operated a private security firm in Itaewon, and who had come to Amara's attention 14 months ago through a contact Seo-jun didn't know she had. Ji Yeon had never met Amara in person. They had had 11 phone calls. On each one, Amara had given her a specific piece of information, and Ji Yeon had given back confirmation. It had been a very methodical process. The second call was to a lawyer. Not the family lawyers, not the Osung retained legal team, but a woman named Christine Park, who practiced international family law from an office in Gangnam and who had been quietly retained by Amara 7 months ago. The third call was to her brother. Marcus answered on the first ring, which meant he'd been awake, which meant he'd seen the news. Because of course it had already made it into the lower-tier entertainment press, the vague and breathless kind of coverage that didn't dare name names but made sure everyone who needed to know understood exactly who was being discussed. "You okay?" he said. "I'm functional," she said. "That's not the same thing." "I know." She looked across the room at the bassinets. "I need you to sit tight for a little while. Don't come to Seoul." A pause. "Amara." "Marcus." The same word twice, but different weights. "Please, I need you to trust me." Another pause. Longer. "Okay," he said, "but I'm not sitting tight forever." "I know," she said again. "I'll call you." She hung up and looked at the window. Outside, Seoul spread in every direction, gray and brilliant and indifferent, the way cities are. By early afternoon, the nursing staff had quietly communicated upward that Mrs. Kang was refusing the arrangements for early discharge and that her room would require careful handling. By mid-afternoon, Park Junho appeared at the door, alone this time, which told her Seo-jun had sent him specifically because Junho had a human face and Seo-jun currently did not want to show his. "Ma'am," Junho said. It was polite. He was always polite. She had never held it against him. He was a man doing a job, and the job was not who he was. "Junho," she said, "sit down." He sat looking slightly uncomfortable, the way large men in small chairs always do. "Tell me what's actually happening," she said. "Not the version Seo-jun wants me to have. The actual version." Junho was quiet for a moment. That moment told her something. "The Seong faction," he said finally. "They've been watching for a sign. The elders are—" He stopped, started again. "There are questions about succession, about the children's position. They're questioning legitimacy," she said. Junho said nothing, which was confirmation. Amara felt the specific, familiar cold of being in a room where people have been talking about her. She had felt it before, in corporate boardrooms, in faculty lounges, in every space she'd entered first as the only black woman present, and had to spend the first 20 minutes establishing that she was supposed to be there. She knew how to metabolize it. "Okay," she said. "Ma'am?" I said okay. She looked at him directly. "Thank you for telling me the truth. That actually helps." Junho looked briefly, like a man who hadn't been thanked in a while. "One more thing," she said. "The man who came with Seo-jun this morning, who was he, Tun?" A pause. "Internal Affairs Division," Junho said carefully. "Elder appointed." Which meant Seo-jun hadn't been in control of that meeting as completely as he'd wanted to appear. Which meant the elders had already put someone in the room. Amara nodded slowly. She was building the picture. She'd been building it for months. This was just a new piece. "You should know," Junho said, rising, "that there's been a vehicle, black SUV, circling the hospital block since approximately 0600. She kept her face neutral. "Not one of yours?" "No, ma'am." The ice feeling was back. She held it still. "Thank you, Junho." He left. She sat for a moment looking at her sons. The larger one, Kai, was asleep with his mouth slightly open, small and absolute and trusting in the way that newborns are because they have no choice but to be. The smaller one was awake, eyes tracking the light the way very new babies do. Not understanding, but already paying attention. Already paying attention. Your father is afraid, she told him quietly. And afraid men do stupid things. But I'm not afraid. So we're going to be all right. She picked up her phone and made a fourth call, one she had hoped not to have to make this early. Ji-yeon answered in 3 seconds. The timeline's changed, Amara said. I need everything active by morning. Already in motion, Ji-yeon said. I saw the news. Amara almost smiled. Of course you did. She ended the call and began methodically to pack. She was gone before the 48 hours were up. Not running. Amara Bell had never run from anything in her life, and she was not going to start in a hospital gown with an overnight bag and 2 newborns. She walked out of Yonsei Premier at 6:47 a.m. through a service entrance on the building's north side, wearing clothes Ji-yeon's people had brought up through a laundry cart the night before, dark jeans, a loose jacket, sneakers. The twins were in a double carrier system that Ji-yeon had also sourced, one against her chest, one against the chest of a woman named Sue, who worked for Ji-yeon and who had the specific quality of looking like nobody in particular. That was a skill. Amara respected it. The black SUV that had been circling the block was gone by the time they reached the street. That was either good news or very bad news, and she had learned long ago that she couldn't afford to spend energy on the difference until she had more information. Ji-yeon had booked 3 rooms at the Signal Seoul under a corporate name tied to a consulting firm that existed on paper in Singapore and nowhere else. Amara had helped set it up 11 months ago. At the time, Seojun had been in Tokyo for 10 days, and she had been alone in the main estate, with nothing but time, and the slow, gathering certainty that she needed to build something he couldn't see. The hotel suite was on the 34th floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a view of the Han River going silver in the early light. Amara stood at the glass for exactly 30 seconds, letting herself feel the exhaustion, the full weight of it, 2 days without real sleep, a body that had done something enormous and hadn't been given the time to recover, and then she put it somewhere she could find it later and turned back to the room. Sue had arranged both boys in the center of the large bed, bordered by pillows, and was standing at a respectful distance. I need a breast pump, Amara said, and coffee, real coffee, not the decaf situation. Already ordered, Sue said. Good. Amara sat down on the edge of the bed and pulled out her phone. 17 missed calls. 12 from a number she recognized as the estate's main administrative line, 3 from Junho. 1 from a number she didn't recognize, which she flagged for Ji-yeon. 1 from Christine Park. She called Christine first. I saw the discharge records, Christine said, skipping hello entirely. You checked out early. I was done with the hospital. Amara. Christine had a voice built for delivering facts that no one wanted to hear. The family legal team filed a motion at 7 a.m. They're requesting a formal documentation of the children's birth circumstances. Amara was quiet for a moment. Define circumstances. They're calling it a procedural formality. It's not. It never is. She looked at the smaller twin who was awake again, doing that focused-on-nothing stare. What's our position? Strong. But it requires you to stay visible. If you disappear, they'll frame it as instability. You need to be somewhere they can see you, but on your terms. I'm at the Signal, corporate booking. A pause. That'll hold for maybe 6 hours before someone finds it. I know. She'd calculated that. 6 hours is enough. She hung up and looked at Sue. When Ji-yeon checks in, tell her I need a full report on the interior of the Osung Elder Council. Specifically, the Seong faction. I want names, I want connections, and I want to know who's been talking to the press. Sue nodded once and stepped out. Amara sat alone with her sons for the first time since the hospital, in the quiet of a room that cost more per hour than she'd spent on groceries for a month when she was 22 and surviving on a graduate stipend in a studio apartment in Chicago. She thought about that apartment sometimes. She thought about the specific texture of knowing exactly what you had and exactly what it would cost and making the numbers work through sheer refusal to let them not. She had gotten very good at making things work. The smaller twin made a sound, not crying, something between a hum and an exhale, and she reached over and put her hand against his chest, feeling the rise and fall of it. I know, she told him. Me too. Seojun found out she was gone at 7:14 a.m. He was in the study of the main estate, at the desk that had been his father's and his grandfather's before that, going through the overnight security logs with the particular focused blankness he used when he needed to think without letting anyone in the room see him thinking. The call came from the hospital administrator directly, not through Junho, not filtered, which told him the administrator was more afraid of Seo-jun's reaction than of breaching protocol. He listened to the message once, put the phone face down on the desk. The two men in the room, security analysts, both of them, both very good at reading a room, found something interesting to look at on their laptops. Seo-jun sat for exactly 23 seconds. Then he said, "Get me Junho." Junho appeared in 4 minutes, which meant he'd been waiting in the corridor. "She's gone," Seo-jun said. "Yes, sir." "You knew." Junho's face was careful. "I had a suspicion, sir, toward the end of last evening. And you didn't tell me." A pause. The kind of pause that means the person is choosing between two uncomfortable truths. "I didn't feel it was my place." Seo-jun looked at him for a long moment. Junho was 41 years old. He had been with the Kong family since Seo-jun was 26, and he had survived longer in this position than anyone in the organization's memory because he understood the precise location of every line. He did not cross them. He also did not pretend they weren't there. "Find her," Seo-jun said. "I know where she is," Junho said. That stopped him. "Then why?" "Because she's safe, sir, and because—" Another careful pause. "Because I thought you might benefit from a few hours before you went to her." The silence in the study was the kind that pressed against the walls. "Junho," Seo-jun said. "Sir." "Don't make decisions for me." "No, sir." But he didn't look apologetic. He looked like a man who had made the decision he believed was right and was prepared to absorb the consequences. The Signal, 34th floor, suite is booked under Meridian Consulting Loti, Singapore registration. Seo-jun wrote nothing down. He didn't need to. "That company?" "Not in our records, no." "She built it." "It appears so." He stood, reached for his jacket, and then stopped, one hand on the lapel, because something was working its way up through him that he didn't have a clean name for. Not anger, not exactly, not anymore. Something more complicated than anger. The kind of feeling that comes when someone does something you should have anticipated and didn't, and the failure is yours as much as theirs. She had built a shadow company during her pregnancy, in a jurisdiction he hadn't thought to monitor. "Was there anything else," he said, "that she built without my knowledge?" Junho's expression flickered, very slightly. "I think, sir, that's what you need to go find out." He arrived at the Signal at 9:30 a.m., alone, which was the choice that Junho had suggested without suggesting it, because showing up with security would have made it a confrontation, and whatever Seo-jun needed this to be, it was not that. Not yet. The door to the suite opened before he knocked. A woman he didn't recognize, the late 30s, unremarkable face, the specific stance of someone with combat training, held it open and looked at him with no particular expression. "She's expecting you," the woman said. He stepped in. Amara was sitting on the edge of the bed. Both boys were in front of her, arranged on the comforter, and she was looking at them with a focus so complete that it took her a full 2 seconds to bring her eyes up to him. 2 seconds in which he stood in the doorway of a hotel suite she had arranged and staffed and stocked, and understood that he was in her space now, not his. She looked worse than she had at the hospital. Deeper shadows under her eyes, a tightness around her jaw that told him she'd been clenching her teeth. She also looked more herself, like the version of her that existed when she wasn't performing composure for his benefit. "Close the door," she said. He closed it. The woman with the combat stance had disappeared somewhere. He didn't hear her, which was impressive. "Sit down," Amara said. He sat. Not because she told him to, because the alternative was standing over her, and standing over someone while they were clearly running on no sleep, and had just survived something physical and enormous felt like the wrong kind of power. They looked at each other across the expanse of comforter and sleeping infants. "You want to know how I paid for this," she said. "I want to know a lot of things." "Start with that one, then." He took a breath. "The Singapore company. Meridian Consulting. She said it without inflection. I registered it 22 months ago. I've been running small advisory contracts through it. Nothing that touched the organization, nothing that required your resources. It's clean. Christine's team has vetted the entire structure. Christine Park, he said, my lawyer, yes. You retained a family lawyer without telling me. You have 7 lawyers I've never met. She said it flatly. Don't. He stopped. She was right, and they both knew she was right, and pushing on it would have made him look petty, which he was not willing to be. The security woman, he said. Ji Yeon. Her firm. I have 4 of her people with me right now. 2 in the corridor, 1 on the floor below, 1 in the lobby. He was quiet for a moment, doing the math. You started building this before Hanoi, she said. He went still. Hanoi was 8 months ago. A meeting he had told her was routine. A diplomatic trip, organization business, 3 days. What he had not told her, what she should not have known, was that 2 of the men he'd met with in Hanoi were connected to a faction that had been moving against the Osung organization's eastern interests for the better part of a year. What happened in Hanoi had not gone well. 3 of his men had come home in arrangements that required careful paperwork. He had come home looking like he'd slept in his clothes and had told Amara it was a difficult trip when she asked. How did you know about Hanoi? He said. Not a question, the question. I didn't, she said. Not specifically. I knew something was wrong when you came back. I'd been watching you long enough to know the difference between difficult and afraid. She held his gaze. You were afraid. And afraid men don't keep their families safe. They keep their families close so they feel safe. That's different. The room was very quiet. One of the boys, the larger one, Kai, made a small fussing sound. Amara reached over without looking and rested her hand on him, and the sound stopped. The ease of it, the automatic nature of it, hit him somewhere he wasn't prepared for. I need you to understand something, she said. I didn't build any of this because I was planning to leave you. I built it because I had 2 people coming who were going to need me to be standing when everything else fell apart, and I could see the falling starting. I was trying to protect you, he said. She looked at him, and the look was not angry, which would have been easier. It was tired. The specific tired of someone who has had this conversation in their head many times, and is now having it out loud and finding it exactly as insufficient as they knew it would be. You were trying to protect the empire, she said. You made that very clear yesterday morning. Those aren't mutually exclusive. They were, in that room. Her voice stayed level. You walked in, and you did not look at your sons. You did not look at me. You ran a threat assessment, and then you told me I was being relocated. Seojun. She said his name like she was setting it down carefully. I had just given birth. That is not a moment you get back. He had nothing to say to that. He knew he had nothing to say to that before she finished the sentence. The elders sent someone into that room, he said. The man with me. I didn't choose to bring him. He was there when I arrived at the hospital. He's been assigned by the Seong faction to observe my decisions. Something shifted in her face. Very small. You had a watchdog. Yes. And you still said it that way, in front of him. He stopped. The word that came up was managing, and it was the wrong word, and they both knew it. The situation, she said, and for the first time her voice had an edge in it, something that was not quite anger but was the door to it. Required you to look at your sons. That's all. That's what the situation required. He breathed in. Out. The smaller twin was awake now, both of them awake, and looking at the light in the way that newborns do. Not at anything, at everything, at the raw fact of existence. He looked at them and felt something move in his chest that was unfamiliar and physical, like a muscle he had never used suddenly being used. What's his name? He said. I haven't named him yet. She watched him. I was waiting. The weight of that sentence was enormous. I'm sorry, he said. Amara was quiet. She did not say it's okay because it wasn't, and she was not a person who said things that weren't true for the sake of making a room more comfortable. I know, she said instead. I also know that sorry doesn't change what the Seong faction is doing with what you gave them yesterday. She reached for her phone. Ji Yeon's report came in an hour ago. I was going to wait until I had more, but you should see it. She handed him the phone. He read. His face did not change while he read. It was one of the things he'd trained himself to do, control surface expression while processing. But his breathing changed. She was watching his breathing. She always had been. The report detailed 6 specific communications between the Seong faction's primary members over the previous 18 hours. 3 were internal, positioning discussions, nothing he hadn't anticipated. 2 were external, which was concerning, and 1 was a press contact. A specific journalist at a specific outlet who specialized in coverage of Seoul's shadow economy, who had received, at 4:17 a.m., a set of documents that implied the Osung heir's rejection of his newborns was connected to a dispute over the children's parentage. He put the phone down. "They sent it to Choi Min-soo," he said. Yes. Choi Min-soo was the kind of journalist who didn't need much. The implication alone would be enough. The story would run without any direct accusation. It would be framed as a question, as sources familiar with the matter, as observers within the organization noting that the formal family announcement had not been made. It would be devastating precisely because it was deniable. "They're going to say the children aren't mine," he said. "They're going to let the question exist," Amara said. "Which is worse. A direct accusation can be denied. A question just sits there." He stood up, moved to the window. The Han River was fully lit now, the morning traffic on the bridge above it moving in its steady, indifferent stream. "I need to make a call," he said. "Make it." He pulled his phone out, stopped, turned back to her. "The 4 Ji-yeon people. Are they adequate?" She looked at him with an expression that was almost dry. "They've been adequate all morning. I'm adding 6 of mine. Seo-jun. Not negotiable." It came out harder than he intended. He dialed it back slightly. "Please, it is not negotiable. You can keep Ji-yeon's people. I am adding 6 of mine, and that is not a conversation." She looked at him for a long moment. "Fine." He nodded and turned back to the window. I was halfway through the call when Junho appeared in the doorway, which meant Junho had been in the corridor, which Seo-jun had already suspected, and held up a tablet with an expression that Seo-jun could read from across the room. He ended his call. "What?" Junho walked to him and tilted the tablet. On the screen was a live feed from a camera Seo-jun didn't recognize, which meant it was one of Ji-yeon's, showing the street below the hotel, specifically showing a black SUV parked at the corner, different plates than the one from the hospital, same model. "That's not ours," Seo-jun said. "No, sir." "And not Seong faction." "No, sir." Junho's voice was very steady. "We ran the plates. The vehicle is registered to a shell company connected to the Baek Syndicate." The name landed in the room like something dropped from a height. The Baek Syndicate was not a faction inside the Osung organization. The Baek Syndicate was something else entirely. Older, less organized, more willing to operate in the spaces that even the Kong family had decided were too dangerous. They had been peripheral for years, orbiting without ever making direct contact. Amara had heard the name. He could see it in her face. The recognition, the calculation, the way she pulled both boys slightly closer without appearing to move. "Why," she said, "would the Baek Syndicate be watching this hotel?" "Because someone told them where to look," Seo-jun said. The room went still. "The Seong faction," Amara said slowly, "is not just running a press campaign." "No," he said, "they're not." He looked at her, really looked at her, at the exhaustion and the precision and the 2 small boys tucked against her, at the woman who had built a shadow company and a security team and a legal strategy while carrying his children and sleeping beside him in the same bed, and felt something that was not sentiment, nothing as soft as sentiment, but was the hard, specific knowledge of someone who has just understood the shape of their own mistake. He had walked out of that hospital room and handed his enemies a story. The story wasn't about him, it was about her. And now the Baek Syndicate was parked outside her hotel, and the Seong faction's press contact was writing a question about his son's legitimacy, and Amara was sitting on a 34th floor bed looking at him with that steady, terrible calm, and he understood that he had done this, not alone, but substantially. "We're moving," he said. "Where?" she said. And before he could answer, the security tablet in Junho's hand buzzed, twice, sharp, and Ji-yeon's voice came through it without preamble, flat and certain. "Laser acquisition on the nursery window," she said. 30 seconds ago. Northeast position, exterior scaffolding on the building opposite. My people are moving, but I need a decision now. Seojun moved before the sentence finished. Not toward the door, toward the bed, toward Amara and the boys. Because the window was floor to ceiling and the bed was in direct line of sight, and there was exactly one thing that mattered in the next 4 seconds, which was getting himself between that window and the people on the bed. He covered the distance in 3 strides and put himself in front of her, facing the glass, his back to the room. He heard Amara exhale sharply. Not a scream, not panic, just the sudden involuntary release of breath from someone whose threat assessment has just been confirmed by something they'd been hoping was wrong. He heard the boys, Kai, the small, unnamed one. He heard both of them, real and present and alive. He heard Ji Yeon's people moving in the corridor. And standing there with his back to his wife and his sons, and his face to a window in a hotel he'd had no part in choosing, Seojun Kong felt something clarify in him the way things only clarify when you're standing in the exact place where you understand what you're willing to lose and what you are not. Ji Yeon, he said, loud enough for the tablet, tell me you have eyes on the shooter. Confirmed position, she said. My 2 on the ground floor are 30 seconds out. But sir, a pause that lasted less than a second. There's a second vehicle. The SUV is moving. The SUV was moving toward the entrance. They were not here to watch. Seojun didn't wait for the elevator. He pulled Amara off the bed by her arm. Not rough, but not gentle either. The specific grip of someone who has made a calculation about time and margin and decided that apology comes later. And she was already moving before he finished the motion, already twisting to get both boys off the comforter, already doing what needed to be done without being told. That was the thing about her, she didn't freeze. He had worked with men who froze, men who had trained for years and still went blank when the real moment arrived. Amara went sharp. Sue appeared from the inner room with the double carrier already open. No words exchanged. The transfer of the twins took 11 seconds. Amara shrugged into the carrier with a practiced motion that told him she'd been wearing it for hours, possibly the whole morning, possibly hadn't taken it off once since they arrived. Service stairs, Ji-yeon's voice said through the tablet. B2 exit. I have a vehicle waiting. Grey Carnival. Plates start with 74. My people, Seojun started. Already coordinating with yours. A brief pause. I've been coordinating with yours since 0800, Mr. Kang. Junho set it up. He looked at Junho. Junho looked at the middle distance. They moved. The service corridor was narrow and lit with the particular fluorescent flatness of spaces not designed for guests. Bare concrete, the smell of cleaning chemicals, a mop bucket overturned near the stairwell door. Seojun went first. Sue behind Amara, Junho bringing up the rear with his hand inside his jacket. The twins were quiet, Kai making small breathing sounds, the unnamed one still doing that concentrated silence that had started to feel less like peace and more like attention. 3 flights down, Seojun stopped on the landing and held up one fist. Everyone stopped. He listened. Below them, on the B1 level, something was moving, not fast, deliberate. He turned to Junho and pointed down, then held up 2 fingers. Junho nodded, pulled his phone, typed 3 characters to someone, and 30 seconds later his earpiece crackled. He listened, shook his head once. Not ours, Junho said quietly. Not Ji Yeon's either. Seojun looked at the door beside him. 2nd floor. He pushed through it. They went out through the 2nd floor corridor. Guest rooms, a housekeeping cart, a confused attendant who took one look at the group moving through her hallway and became very interested in her linens, and found the secondary elevator bank at the far end. Service elevator, down to the parking structure, out through the maintenance bay onto a side street. The Grey Carnival was where Ji Yeon said it would be. They were moving inside 4 minutes from the first alert. Seojun sat in the front passenger seat and watched the city move past the window while Ji Yeon's driver navigated them north through streets that were already filling with morning traffic. Behind him, Amara sat with both boys, Sue beside her, Junho in the back row. The van smelled like vinyl and someone's coffee from hours ago. Where are we going? Amara said. The East Wing, he said, the main estate. Silence. Seojun. It's the most defensible location I have. East Wing has its own entrance, its own security system, independent power. I can put 12 men on the perimeter inside an hour. The elders are not going to be in the East Wing. He turned to look at her over his shoulder. She was holding the smaller twin's foot through the carrier fabric, just holding it, the way people hold something they're afraid of losing. You'll have full autonomy of the space. I won't use it as leverage. She held his gaze for a moment. That's the first time you've used that word with me. Autonomy. He had nothing to say to that, so he turned back to the window. The city moved past. Seoul in the morning, loud and indifferent and enormous, going about its business without any awareness that 3 hours ago, someone had painted a laser sight on a window where 2 5-day-old infants were sleeping. That was the thing about cities. They had no memory. Whatever happened inside them got absorbed and paved over and forgotten, and only the people it happened to carried it forward. He was going to find out who had ordered the shooter. He was going to find out today. The east wing of the Kong estate was a building within a building, a separate structure attached to the main house by a glass corridor that could be sealed at both ends. His grandfather had built it in the 1980s as a guest wing. His father had retrofitted it with independent systems after a specific incident in 2003 that was not discussed in family records. Seo-jun had used it twice, both times as a secure meeting location for conversations he couldn't afford to have inside the main house's surveillance footprint. Amara walked through it with the twins still in the carrier and said nothing. She went room by room, bedroom, sitting room, kitchenette, secondary bedroom, touching nothing, just looking. Reading the space the way she read everything, systematically. The window locks, she said in the nursery room, upgraded last year, polycarbonate glass, rated for... I know what polycarbonate is. She wasn't sharp about it, just precise. I want the lock mechanisms manual, not electronic. If the power goes out or the system gets hacked, I need to be able to lock these myself. He pulled his phone and sent a text to his facilities manager. Done by this afternoon. She turned and looked at him. He was standing in the doorway because he hadn't been invited in, and he was aware of that, the specific geometry of it, her space, her threshold, his choice to wait. The elders are going to request a paternity test, she said. Yes. Are you going to let them? The question was flat. No effect. But the thing underneath the flatness was enormous, and they both knew it. I'm going to handle the elders, he said. That's not what I asked. He held her gaze. No, I'm not going to let them administer a paternity test. Those children are mine. Anyone who needs documentation to accept that is welcome to leave the organization. Something moved across her face. It wasn't relief. Too complicated for relief. More like the specific expression of someone who has been waiting for a position and has finally heard it stated clearly and is now processing what it costs to believe it. Okay, she said. He nodded, turned to go. Seo-jun. He stopped. The baby doesn't have a name. He stood in the corridor for a moment, looking at the wall. Then he turned back. What were you thinking? I wasn't thinking anything specific. I was waiting. He looked at the boy in question, the smaller one, in the right side of the carrier, awake and doing that particular focused look at nothing. He had a small mark behind his left ear, a faint discoloration that the hospital had noted and cleared as benign. It looked like a brushstroke. Jian, Seo-jun said. Amara was quiet. It means, I know what it means. She did. Her Korean was better than he'd acknowledged, steadfast. Jian, she said, testing the weight of it. She looked down at him. Jian, she said again, softer, not testing anything now, just saying it to the baby. The baby's fingers flexed. Seo-jun left before he did something he hadn't yet figured out how to do in front of another person. The meeting he'd been building toward since 7 a.m. happened at noon in the main house study, and it was not a meeting anyone could have described as comfortable. Elder Kang Byung-hak. No direct relation. The name was a coincidence that had long since stopped being funny. Sat across the desk with the posture of a man who had outlasted 3 generations of Kong leadership and intended to outlast a 4th. He was 73 years old. His hair had been white since 50. He had eyes that were very still and very watchful, the kind of eyes that had spent decades seeing what people tried to hide. Beside him was a younger man, Elder Seong Tae-jun, the Seong faction's primary voice on the council, 48, educated in London, with the cultivated affect of someone who had learned to perform reasonableness so thoroughly they'd started to believe it.
Seojun sat at his father's desk and put nothing on it between them. No documents, no tablets. He wanted his hands visible and empty because in this particular room, with these particular men, what you held told them more than what you said. The incident at the Signal this morning, Elder Kang Byung-hak began, has been addressed, Seojun said. The Beck Syndicate is a separate matter. Seojun looked at him directly. I'm more interested in how they knew which hotel to find. A silence. Elder Seong shifted, very slightly. Surely you're not suggesting...
I'm not suggesting anything, Seojun said. I'm stating that the Beck Syndicate had a location that was not publicly known, that was known internally to fewer than a dozen people, and that the timing of their presence aligned precisely with a set of documents that were delivered to a press contact at 4:17 this morning. He let that sit. I'm not suggesting. I'm describing a pattern. The room was very quiet. Elder Kang Byung-hak said, The press situation is regrettable. The press situation is deliberate, Seojun said, and we're all going to stop pretending otherwise. Seong's jaw tightened. You're making an accusation without evidence. I have the documents, Seojun said. The metadata on the file package traces to a device registered to this estate's administrative network, specifically to a terminal in the records wing. He paused. Which I believe falls under your operational oversight, Elder Seong. The temperature in the room changed. That terminal is accessible to 14 people, Seojun said. I have all 14 names. I'll be speaking with each of them today. He leaned forward slightly. What I need to know right now, from both of you, is whether this council is going to continue operating as a body or whether certain members have decided to begin working outside it. Elder Kang Byung-hak looked at Elder Seong. It was a brief look. 73 years of political survival in a single exchange of eye contact. The council, Elder Kang Byung-hak said carefully, remains unified. Good. Seojun stood. Then the paternity question is closed. I expect a council statement to that effect before end of day. And the Choi Min-soo story will be suppressed. I assume the appropriate resources can be applied before the evening cycle. Seong said, and your wife's position is as my wife. Seojun buttoned his jacket. And the mother of the Oh-sung heirs. Any further discussion of her position can be directed to my lawyers. He moved toward the door. I'll expect the statement by 4. He left them sitting in the study that had belonged to his father and his grandfather before that, and he walked down the corridor with his hands loose at his sides and his breathing controlled. And he made it to the bathroom at the end of the East Wing's connecting passage before he put both hands on the sink and stood there for 30 seconds doing nothing but breathing, because his hands were not entirely steady and he needed them to be before he went back out. Jiyeon's full report arrived at 2:17 p.m. Seojun read it in the East Wing sitting room. Amara had taken the twins to the bedroom for a feeding, and he was alone except for one of Ji-yeon's people stationed near the door. And he read it twice, because the first time he read it, he thought he'd misunderstood something. He hadn't. The Beck Syndicate's presence at the Signal had not been a coincidence or an opportunistic move. The operation had been in planning for at minimum 6 days. 6 days before the birth. Before Seojun had walked out of the hospital suite. Before any of it had become public. Someone had told the Beck Syndicate 6 days ago that Amara would be alone. He put the report down, picked it up again. Read the third section. The shooter on the scaffolding had been identified through Ji-yeon's network as a freelance operator known to work contracts sourced through a specific broker in Busan. That broker had 3 known clients with Oh-sung adjacent connections. 2 of them were the Seong faction's peripheral operators. The third was Park Junho. He sat with that for a long time. Junho, who had been with the Kong family for 15 years. Junho, who had told him where Amara was this morning without being asked. Junho, who had arranged early coordination with Ji-yeon's team. Junho, who had been in the corridor outside the hotel suite, who had been perfectly positioned to know exactly where Amara was at every moment. He pressed his thumb against the side of his phone hard enough that his knuckle went white. Pressed it there and held it, and made himself think rather than react, because reacting right now would be the most dangerous thing he could do. Junho had a wife, 2 daughters, 11 and 8. He lived in Seongbuk-dong in a house that cost more than his official salary covered, which Seojun had noticed 3 years ago and had decided was none of his business because Junho was good at his job and loyalty was worth more than perfect financial transparency in this particular world. He had been wrong about that. He picked up his phone, did not call Junho, typed a single text to a man named Woo Sang-chul, who ran internal security for the organization's most sensitive operations, and who was, as far as Seo-jun knew, the one person in his immediate circle with no Seong faction connection. The text said, "East Wing, now, come through the garden entrance." He put the phone face down on the table. He looked at the door to the bedroom where Amara was. Closed. Behind it he could hear, barely, the walls were thick, the small sounds of the twins. A voice, very low. Amara talking to them, probably. She did that constantly, he'd noticed. Spoke to them in that low, even voice as if they understood every word, as if the act of speaking was important regardless of comprehension. He thought about telling her. He thought about what her face would do when she found out that the man who had been her informal point of contact for the past 12 hours, who had told her the truth about the Seong faction, who had in some ways been the only member of Seo-jun's staff to treat her like a person, that this man had sold her location to people with a shooter and an SUV. He decided he would tell her, but not yet. Not before he knew more. Not before he had Wu in the room. Sang-chul arrived in 11 minutes, which was fast, which meant he'd already been somewhere in the estate. I was 51, built like someone who'd played rugby in his youth and never quite stopped, with a face that looked like it had absorbed a significant number of opinions about it without changing expression once. He sat down across from Seo-jun without being told to, looked at the report Seo-jun slid across the table. Read it. "Junho," he said. "Yes." Sang-chul turned the page, read the third section. "The broker in Busan." "Yes." "How certain is this?" "Ji-yeon sourced it. 3 independent confirmations." Sang-chul set the report down and looked at the wall for a moment in the way that people look at walls when they're working something out and don't want their face watched while they do it. Then he looked back. "He's in the main house right now. East Corridor. He's been running your security rotation personally since we got back." "I know." "You want me to No." Seo-jun's voice was flat. "I want him exactly where he is. I want his access codes left active. I want nothing changed. He cannot know we know." Sang-chul studied him. "And when you're ready to move?" "I'll tell you." Seo-jun leaned forward. "What I need from you right now is a full trace on every communication Junho has made in the past 3 weeks. Every call, every text, every meeting. I want the picture complete before I put him in a room. That's going to take time. I have until tomorrow morning." He picked up the report and closed it. "One more thing. The Beck Syndicate SUV that moved toward the hotel entrance. My people diverted it before contact. Where's the driver now?" Sang-chul's expression said something without his mouth moving. Sang-chul. "He's at the Seongbuk facility," Sang-chul said. "Has been since 11 a.m. The Seongbuk facility was a basement room in a building the organization officially used for storage. It served other purposes." "Who authorized the pickup?" Seo-jun said. "Junho," Sang-chul said. The room was very quiet again. Junho had authorized the collection of the Beck Syndicate driver, which meant Junho knew the driver was connected to the operation, which meant Junho had put the driver somewhere he could control access to, which meant there was a version of this where the driver never said anything to anyone who could use it against the Seong faction or against Junho himself. The thing about realizing you have been betrayed by someone for a long time is that it doesn't hit you once. It hits you in layers. The first layer is the fact itself. The second layer is the retrospective. Every moment you now have to reread, every conversation and decision and small gesture that now means something different than it appeared to mean. The third layer is the specific ache of having trusted something that was never real. Seo-jun was on the second layer and moving toward the third, and he needed to stop there, needed to set it down and deal with it later, because right now the driver in the Seongbuk facility was the most important problem. "Get him out of there," Seo-jun said. "Quietly. Use your own people. No one from my primary security rotation. Move him to the Mapo facility instead and make sure Junho doesn't know he's been moved." Sang-chul nodded. "And get me the full operational timeline on the Beck contract. I need to know who signed off and when." Sang-chul stood, paused. "Sir, the Seong Faction Council statement. You said you needed it by 4. 4. Yes. It's 3:40. Seo-jun looked at his watch. He had forgotten about the statement. He never forgot things. The fact that he'd forgotten this told him something about where his head actually was. "I'll handle it," he said. Sang-chul left. Seo-jun sat alone for another minute. 2. The sounds from the bedroom had gone quiet. The twins were probably sleeping. He thought about Junho's face this morning at the hotel. The careful, considered expression when he'd admitted he'd known where Amara was and hadn't immediately told Seo-jun. He'd presented it as loyalty to both of them, as a considered human gesture from a man who understood nuance. And Seo-jun had read it that way, had been grateful for it, in the particular unexpressed way he was grateful for things, had added it to the column of reasons Junho was an asset rather than just an employee. It had been management. Junho making sure he knew exactly where Amara was and exactly where Seo-jun was in relation to her, keeping both targets visible. He had been played. Inside his own estate, by his own head of security, while his wife was recovering from childbirth and his sons were 48 hours old. He pulled out his phone and called the Seong faction's primary administrative contact and said, with the particular cold courtesy that was the most dangerous version of his voice, that the council statement would be required within the next 15 minutes, or the conversation about the records terminal would become significantly less private. The statement was issued in 11. He was standing at the east wing window, watching the garden where his security rotation moved in patterns he now understood had been constructed by someone who knew every gap in them, when the bedroom door opened and Amara appeared. She looked better. She'd slept probably even an hour. Her hair was down, slightly disordered, and she was carrying Jian against her chest without the carrier, just her arm, curled under him, the way she'd already developed the particular muscle memory of a parent. She looked at his face. "What happened?" she said. He turned from the window. He had decided not to tell her yet, and he looked at her and revised the decision in the same moment, because Amara had been operating in a situation with incomplete information because of him for the entire duration of this marriage, and the specific cost of that was currently parked in a basement in Seongbuk-dong, and she had the right to know what she was inside. "Junho," he said. She went still. "He's the one who told the Beck Syndicate where you were." She stood in the doorway holding Jian and looked at him, and he watched her process it. Watched her face do the thing it did when she was taking something enormous and turning it into something she could act on. Not avoiding it, not softening it, just making it workable. "How long?" she said. "I don't know yet. At least 6 days. Possibly longer." 6 days. She said it quietly. He was coordinating with Ji Yeon's team. He was the one who... She stopped. He watched something cross her face that was close to nausea, the specific physical response to understanding that a hand you thought was safe was the one that pointed the gun. He told Ji Yeon where to position her people this morning. He told them which corridor, which exit. Yes. She breathed in slowly through her nose. Out. He was managing the rescue of the thing he arranged. Yes. Because if Ji Yeon's people got to us and his people failed, he could still control what the driver said. She looked down at Jian for a moment, the baby asleep against her arm, completely trusting and completely unaware. "Where's the driver now?" "Somewhere Junho can't reach him." "And Junho?" "Still running my security rotation." He held her gaze. "I need him in place until I have the full picture. If he disappears or goes dark, the Seong faction will know we've found the connection." She was quiet for a long moment, long enough that Kai made a sound from the bedroom behind her, and she turned, checked, turned back. "There's something else," she said. It was not a question. He looked at her. "The Seong faction connection to the Baek operation," she said slowly, "means the shooter at the hotel wasn't improvised. It was planned before any of this week happened, before you walked out of the hospital, before the press story." She tilted her head slightly. "Which means someone inside the Seong faction knew your reaction in advance. He had gotten there himself, about 20 minutes ago. He had been hoping he was wrong." "They knew you'd walk out," she said, "or they planned for it. Either way, someone told them how you respond to political pressure, and they built the operation around it." Her voice was even, absolutely even. "They used you, Seo-jun. They didn't just exploit the situation, they created it." The worst part was not hearing her say it. The worst part was the particular look on her face when she said it. Not anger, not even contempt. just the exhausted acknowledgement of someone who has been several steps ahead of a disaster for months and is now watching it arrive anyway. He had walked into a hospital room and delivered exactly the performance his enemies had needed him to deliver. He had done the work for them. "I know," he said. She looked at him. The baby in her arms made a small sound, and she adjusted her grip automatically, the way she did everything, with a competence that looked effortless because she had worked so hard that effort no longer showed on the surface. Then her phone rang. She glanced at it. Her face changed. Not much, but he was watching closely now. He was watching everything closely, and he saw it. "It's Marcus," she said. She answered it. He watched her face go from controlled to something underneath controlled within the first 3 seconds of the call, something he had only seen once before. The night of the miscarriage, 2 a.m., her face in the dark. She said, Marcus, slow down." A pause. "Marcus, where are—" She stopped, listened. The color in her face did something he had no clinical description for. She lowered the phone, looked at Seojun with the specific expression of someone who has just had the last wall come down. "They have my brother," she said. The phone was still in her hand. Seojun crossed the room in 4 steps and took it from her. Not taking it from her, she gave it, which was worse somehow, the specific surrender of someone whose hands had stopped working, and put it to his ear. Static, then breathing. Then a voice he didn't recognize, male, Korean with a regional accent he placed somewhere south, Jeolla, maybe. Unhurried in the particular way of people who are unhurried because they have something you need. "Mr. Kong," the voice said. "Where is he?" Seojun said. "Safe, for now. That's a time-sensitive status." "What do you want?" A pause that was not uncertainty. It was performance. The pause of someone who had rehearsed this and was enjoying the rehearsal. "There's a location. Incheon, Pier 14, the old cold storage facility. Be there at midnight. Come alone. Bring the woman." That's not. If you send anyone ahead of you, the brother stops breathing. If you're late, the brother stops breathing. If she's not with you, another pause. "You understand." The line went dead. Seojun lowered the phone. Amara was watching him with that terrible steadiness, Jian still against her chest, the baby's cheek pressed against her collarbone, with the absolute trust of someone who has no concept yet that the world can reach in through a phone call and rearrange everything. "Midnight," she said. "Incheon." "Yes." "They want me there." "Yes." She breathed in once, sharp, through her nose. That was all. Then she turned and went back into the bedroom and came out 40 seconds later without Jian, which meant she'd put him down beside Kai, which meant she'd made the calculation instantly. Hands free. That's what this required. "Tell me everything," she said. "Don't manage it. All of it." He told her all of it. The next 3 hours were the most efficiently brutal 3 hours Seojun had spent since Hanoi, and Hanoi had cost him 3 men and 6 weeks of sleep. Sang-chul came back to the East Wing at 4:30 p.m. with the Baek driver's preliminary statement and the face of a man who has been given information he wished someone else had received. The driver, a mid-level Baek operator named Cho In-jun, 34, with a history of contract work stretching back 8 years, had confirmed the source of the operation's intelligence. It had not been Junho alone. Junho had been the access point, the logistics, the internal map. But the contract itself, the funding, the decision to bring in the Baek syndicate rather than using Seong faction's own operators, that had come from somewhere with more insulation, more distance. Someone who understood how to build an operation that could be cut loose without tracing back. The driver had given a name. Seojun sat with that name for 90 seconds and then stood up and put it somewhere cold and functional inside himself because there was a child in a cold storage facility in Incheon and names and reckonings would have to wait their turn. "The midnight timeline," he said to Sang-chul. "They're expecting 2 people in a compromised situation. What are they actually expecting?" Sang-chul spread a map on the table, printed, physical, which was Sang-chul's preference and which Seojun had always found reassuringly analog. Pier 14, the cold storage facility, was decommissioned in 2019. 3 entry points on the building: main loading bay, east service entrance, roof access via the crane housing. The pier itself extends about 60 meters. Open water on 3 sides. Sniper positions. Crane housing. Possibly the roof of the adjacent warehouse. Sangchul's finger moved. But this is the problem. If they have someone on the pier approach road, they'll see anyone we put in early. Any vehicle, anyone on foot would need to be in position before 2100. 3 hours. Seojun looked at the map. How many can you move in that window? 6, maybe 8 if we use the water approach. Water approach. Small craft. Come in from the north, under the pier structure. It's not comfortable, but it's invisible from the road and the roof. Sangchul looked at him. We've done harder approaches. We have. Seojun straightened. Do it. 8 men, water approach, in position by 2030. I want 2 on the east service entrance and 2 under the pier itself. The remaining 4 hold at the perimeter until I signal. And Junho. This was the part Seojun had been building toward for the past hour. He looked at the map without seeing it for a moment, working the geometry. Junho thinks he's managing both sides, he said. The Seong faction sent Marcus to force my hand, force me to the pier at midnight in a compromised position. Junho will expect to be part of my response team. He'll want to be in the room when I plan this. He'll try to get the approach details. Yes, so I'm going to give them to him. He looked up at Sangchul. False approach. Vehicle convoy. Main road, 2330. Make it look like I changed the terms, brought a team, came in loud. Junho believes that's the real plan. He feeds it to his contact, and his contact positions for a convoy that isn't coming. Sangchul nodded slowly. And Junho himself. Junho drives the lead vehicle. He held Sangchul's gaze. He doesn't know that vehicle has 3 of your people in it. After the convoy clears the approach road and confirms the misdirection has worked, your people take him. Alive. Yes. Not for any generous reason. Because Junho alive was information, and information was the only currency that mattered tonight. I want him in a room before dawn. Whatever he knows, I want it. Sangchul folded the map. Precise. Economical. And you, your actual approach. I'll be in the water team. He said it like it was obvious. Sangchul's expression said it was not obvious and was in fact the kind of decision that required pushback. I know the look. Don't. Sir, they asked for me specifically. The approach needs to read as compliant until we're inside the perimeter. I have to be there or the whole architecture falls apart. He picked up his jacket. And he's her brother. Sangchul said nothing for a moment. Then, Amara. What about her? She's going to want to come. She's not coming. Sir, with respect. Sangchul had a very particular voice for delivering things that were going to be said whether or not they were welcome. She's the one they specified. If the surveillance on the approach sees a vehicle with only one person, we'll use a double, someone in the car with me. And if they confirm visually inside, then we deal with it inside. His voice had gone to the place it went when the discussion was over. She stays. She stays with the boys and Ji Yeon's people and 4 of mine on the estate perimeter. That is not a negotiable point. Sangchul looked at him for one more second. Then he picked up the map and left. Amara had already worked it out by the time he got back to the East Wing sitting room. He could see it in the way she was standing, by the window, arms crossed, the particular stance of someone who has arrived at a conclusion and is waiting for the other person to catch up. You're not taking me, she said. No. They specified. I know what they specified. He sat down. Which is exactly why you're not going. She turned from the window. They'll know. They'll suspect. There's a difference, and I need you to trust that I understand it. You're going in the water. He looked at her. How? The map on the table had tide marks on the corner. She said it simply. Not showing off, just accurate. And Sangchul's boots were damp when he came in, which means he's been to the site already. You're going in from underneath the pier. He sat with the fact of her for a moment. The way her mind worked. Not flashy, not performed, just relentlessly precise. He had known it abstractly for years. He was understanding it in his body for the first time. Yes, he said. And Junho. Being handled. She uncrossed her arms, sat down across from him. Marcus doesn't know anything about the organization, she said. He's a school teacher in Atlanta. Whatever they think leverage he provides, it's entirely about me, about my cooperation. I know. So whatever they're holding him for, it's about getting me to the pier, not you.
She met his eyes. Which means their end game isn't the pier. The pier is a mechanism to get me away from this estate, away from the boys. He'd gotten there too, about an hour ago. Yes.
So someone stays here tonight who knows that the real target is the estate. Ji Yeon, he said, and 4 of my people, and Sang Chul's deputy, who I trust with my life in the specific sense that he's saved it twice. I want to speak to Ji Yeon before you leave. I've already arranged it. She looked at him. Something in her face was doing something complex. Not softening, not hardening either, something in between. The expression of a person who is updating their assessment of someone else in real time and doesn't quite know what to do with the update. Don't die, she said. That's the plan. I mean it. She said it without drama, just fact. Don't. He stood. He wanted to say something that would be adequate to the moment and found nothing in his vocabulary that qualified. 3 years of marriage, and he had never learned how to speak in the register the moment required, and he was not going to learn it now, at 5 p.m., before he drove to Incheon to pull her brother out of a building. I'll call when we have him, he said. She nodded. That would have to do. The water was 11 degrees Celsius. Seo Jun had been briefed on this and had understood it intellectually, and was now understanding it in the specific way of a man submerged to his chest in the Han estuary at 9:47 p.m., moving in a line of 8 men through the black water under the wooden infrastructure of Pier 14, while the city's ambient light made everything above them faintly orange and everything below the surface nothing at all. The cold was the kind that moves through gear. He'd worn a thin dry suit, good quality, and it was working, but working was not the same as comfortable, and comfortable was not something this night was going to offer. He focused on movement, hand placement on the pier's cross-bracing, foot placement. The man in front of him, one of Sang Chul's, name was Park Do-hyun, former Navy, who moved through water with the efficiency of someone who had decided to become indistinguishable from it. 40 meters under the pier. 50. The cold storage facility was visible ahead. A low, massive structure, metal-clad, lights in 3 windows on the east face. Loading bay door rolled down. Service entrance on the eastern side was dark. At 60 meters, Do-hyun held up a fist. Everyone stopped. They hung in the water for 30 seconds, listening. Above them, through the pier planking, footsteps. One set. Slow, patrolling cadence. 1 man on the pier surface above them. Seojun counted the footsteps. Regular. Turning at the end of the pier, the far end, 30 feet ahead, which meant they had a window. He tapped Do-hyun's shoulder. Do-hyun moved. They came up through the gap in the pier decking in pairs, water sheeting off them in the dark, and the patrol was at the far end and turning back, and there were 4 of them already on the planking moving toward the east service entrance before the patrol completed his turn. The man on patrol had 3 seconds of recognition before Do-hyun's people reached him. After that, he had no seconds of anything. The east service entrance lock took 45 seconds. Not Seojun, one of Sang Chul's technical people, a small woman named Ha Eunjin, who said nothing and worked the lock with the expression of someone doing a crossword puzzle. The door opened outward, cold air, the smell of industrial refrigerant and rust, and something underneath it that Seojun identified and set aside, because now was not the time. They went in. The facility was a labyrinth of former refrigeration chambers, enormous rooms with insulated walls and floors that still held a residual cold even without power, connected by wide corridors designed for forklift traffic. Emergency lighting only, the red-orange glow of battery-powered strips near the floor, casting everything in a register that made the walls look wet. Seojun moved behind Do-hyun with 2 men flanking him. The other 4 had split, east and west, circling the facility's outer ring to come at the main loading bay from both sides. Voices ahead. Not loud. The particular low murmur of men who are waiting and bored and have been waiting for a while. 3 voices. Maybe 4. He put up 2 fingers. Do-hyun pointed left, then right. The flankers peeled away. 20 seconds. The door to the main refrigeration chamber was ajar. Old, heavy, the insulated kind that weighed 400 pounds and could seal a room entirely. Propped open with a wooden block. Through the gap, light, actual light, a portable work lamp, the kind that construction crews use, throwing harsh white in all directions. He pressed against the wall beside the door and looked through the gap. Marcus Bell was zip-tied to a metal chair in the center of the room. He was wearing the same clothes he'd apparently left the airport in. Jeans, a gray sweatshirt, Atlanta Braves hat still somehow on his head. His face had some blood on it, dried, from a cut above his left eyebrow. He was awake. I was looking at the floor with the posture of someone who has been scared for a long time and has arrived at a kind of grim patience on the other side of scared. There were 4 men in the room with him, 2 near the loading bay door, 1 near the far wall, 1 standing closest to Marcus, leaning against a defunct refrigeration unit with his arms folded. That one was doing the talking. The voice Seo Jun had heard on the phone, Jeolla accent, unhurried. He was talking to someone on a phone, his own phone, held loosely, pacing slightly, checking his watch. Vehicle departed the estate 40 minutes ago. Right, convoy approach, 4 cars. They're running on schedule. A pause. I know. Once we have the woman, it doesn't matter what... He stopped. Something had changed in the room. Marcus had looked up. Not at the phone man, at the door. At the gap in the door. His eyes found Seo Jun's through the gap with the particular accuracy of someone who has been looking at that door for the past hour and has very much been hoping it would do something. Marcus was smart enough not to react. He was a school teacher. He was 31 years old and had a cut above his eye and was zip-tied to a chair in a cold room in Incheon, and he looked at Seo Jun through a crack in a door and looked directly back at the floor. 3 seconds. Seo Jun moved. The door took both hands. Heavy, the hinges stiff. And it didn't open silently. There was a groan from the metal. But by the time the groan registered for the 4 men in the room, Do-hyun was already through the gap and moving right, and Seo Jun was through and moving left, and the 2 flankers were coming through the loading bay door simultaneously from the other side. 4 seconds of confusion. 3 men went down in those 4 seconds. Not dead, not gently, but down and contained. The 4th, the phone man, the one with the Jeolla accent, got far enough to pull a weapon before Seo Jun reached him, and what happened in the next 2 seconds was not clean but was effective. And then the phone man was on the floor with his weapon across the room and his arm at an angle that would require medical attention. The room smelled like cold metal and sweat, and the specific edge that comes with adrenaline in an enclosed space. Marcus Bell lifted his head. "You're the husband," he said. Seo Jun crouched and pulled a blade from his boot and cut the zip ties, wrists first, then ankles. "Yes." "Amara's okay." "She's fine." Marcus pulled the zip tie remnants off his wrists and flexed his fingers, wincing. The cut above his eye had reopened slightly, a thin line of fresh red against the dried blood. He looked around the room at the 4 men on the floor and at Seo Jun's team and at the work lamp throwing its harsh white light over all of it. "Okay," Marcus said. He said it the way people say things when they're still processing whether they're real. "Okay." "Can you walk?" Seo Jun said. "Yeah." Marcus stood, tested it. "Yeah." "Then we move now." They were back through the service entrance and onto the pier in 3 minutes. The Carnival was waiting at the pier's landward end with Sang Chul's driver, engine running. Marcus got in without being told twice. Seo Jun turned to Do-hyun. "The 4 inside, contain them. I want the one with the phone kept separate." He looked at the man whose arm was at the wrong angle, being walked out by 2 of Do-hyun's people. "He talks before morning." "Sir." Do-hyun paused. "Your phone." Seo Jun had felt it buzz twice during the approach. He'd ignored it. Timing, discipline, the hierarchy of problems. He pulled it now and looked at the screen. 2 calls from Ji-yeon, missed, and a text from Ji-yeon's number, sent 8 minutes ago, that said, "East Perimeter Breach. They're inside." He stopped breathing for 1 second. Then he was in the Carnival, and the door wasn't closed yet when he said to the driver, "Estate, now, everything you have." The driver had everything. The car moved. Seo Jun called Ji-yeon. She picked up on the first ring, and he could hear in the background, even before she spoke, what the background sounded like, which told him what the estate sounded like, which told him what the last 8 minutes had been. "Talk," he said. 3-man team, East Perimeter. They cut the fence line at the northeast corner. "My people engaged at the garden entrance. 2 of mine down, not dead. 1 of yours has a GSW to the shoulder. He's stable." Her voice was operational, stripped of everything that wasn't information. They didn't make it to the East Wing. They're contained in the garden. Amara. Intibad. East Wing is sealed. She's locked it from her side. A pause. Sir, she's not alone in there. What do you mean she's not? She has a weapon. I don't know where she got it. One of yours might have left a secondary. Another pause. She also has your son's, and the East Wing door is definitely not opening until she decides to open it. He sat back. His chest was doing something uncomfortable that he did not have time for. Marcus, in the seat beside him, was very carefully not looking at him. The three-man team, Seojun said. Who are they? Beck Syndicate, same operation, but Seojun, Ji Yeon used his name, which he had never done before in the months of their professional relationship. The breach happened 6 minutes after the convoy left the estate. Someone told them when the convoy departed. Junho, he said. Junho was in the convoy. He went still. Junho was supposed to be managed. Your people took him at the approach road, yes, but he made a call before they reached him. One call, 40 seconds. They couldn't get to him in time. A pause. He knew. He knew there was a convoy, and he knew what it meant, and he used the 40-second window. The car was moving at a speed that Seoul's nighttime streets barely tolerated. Through the window, the city strobing past, streetlights, storefronts, the ordinary, brilliant, indifferent machinery of a place that had no interest in what was happening inside this vehicle. Seojun looked at his hands, still damp from the water, a cut on his right palm he hadn't noticed acquiring, the specific physical residue of a night that wasn't finished. Marcus Bell said quietly, "Is my sister all right?" "She's locked in a room with your nephews and a weapon," Seojun said. Marcus looked at him. "Yeah," he said. "That sounds right." Seojun called Sang Chul. "The three-man team in the garden. I want them alive. I want them in a room separate from the phone man from Incheon. Do not let them communicate." He paused. "And find out which of my people left a weapon accessible to the East Wing." "Already looking," Sang Chul said. 40 minutes to the estate." 40 minutes. He looked out the window. He thought about Amara in the East Wing with a weapon she'd sourced from somewhere in the chaos, both boys behind her, the door sealed. He thought about the particular quality of her stillness. Not frozen, not afraid, just compressed. Everything pulled inward and organized around the single point of what needed protecting. He thought about 3 years of marriage in which he had handed her one version of himself and kept everything important behind a door she wasn't supposed to know existed. He thought about what it had taken for her to build Meridian Consulting in secret. A shadow company, a security network, a lawyer, months of quiet construction, not because she was planning anything against him, but because she had understood before he admitted it to himself that there would come a moment when the ground gave out and she needed to be standing on something he hadn't built for her. She had been right. He had known she was intelligent. He had not understood that she had been planning for his failures longer and more thoroughly than he'd been planning for hers. The car moved through Seongbuk, 15 minutes from the estate now. He watched the streets narrow as they moved away from the main roads, the trees thicker, the gaps between buildings wider, and thought about the name the bake driver had given him, the one he'd put somewhere cold and functional 6 hours ago to deal with later. Was arriving. The name was not Elder Seong Taijun. The name was someone he saw at the table 3 times a week, someone who had been in his father's study while his father was dying and had held his hand at the funeral and had told him, afterward, that the organization would survive because Seojun was what it needed. Someone whose loyalty Seojun had never once placed in the question column because some truths feel too foundational to examine. Elder Kang Byung-hak, 73 years old, white hair, still eyes. Not a coincidence of names. Not an ally. Not someone who had outlasted 3 generations of Kong leadership out of devotion. Someone who had survived by always knowing which way the power was moving and positioning himself to receive it, and who had looked at 2 newborn boys and a foreign wife and a leader who was bleeding at every seam and decided this was the moment to accelerate the collapse rather than survive it. Marcus was watching him now. The man had a school teacher's perceptiveness, the specific skill of someone who has spent years reading 20 rooms simultaneously. "You figured something out," Marcus said. "Yes." "Something bad?" "Yes." Marcus looked at his hands, still marked from the zip ties, reddened at the wrists. You going to be able to handle it? Seojun looked at him. It was an odd question, the kind that assumed a relationship between them that didn't technically exist yet. The kind that Marcus Bell probably asked because he'd grown up in a house where his older sister had done the figuring out, and he'd learned early that the people who did the figuring out sometimes needed to be asked if they were going to be able to handle it. Yes, Seojun said. Marcus nodded. Okay. He leaned his head back against the headrest. The Braves hat was still on his head. For what it's worth, he said to the ceiling of the carnival, she never stopped believing you could be better than you were. Seojun said nothing. I told her she was wrong, Marcus said. A lot. Pretty consistently, actually. A pause. I'm saying that because I want you to know I was paying attention, and I'm still not sure I was wrong. But tonight is evidence I should keep my mouth shut for a while. The car turned onto the estate road. The gatehouse lights were all on, security at doubled positions. Through the iron gate, the garden. He could see, even from here, the places where Ji Yeon's operation had pushed the breach team back. The particular disarray of a space where violence had been efficiently applied. The east wing windows were dark. He got out of the car before it fully stopped and was moving toward the east wing entrance when the door opened from the inside. Amara stood in the doorway. She had a Glock 19 in her right hand, held low, finger indexed along the frame, the way someone holds a weapon when they're no longer actively pointing it at anything but are absolutely not putting it down yet. Her hair was disordered. There was a mark on her forearm he needed to look at. Not a wound, more like a bruise, the kind that comes from contact with something hard in a moment of moving quickly. Her eyes went straight past him, to Marcus. Marcus said, "Hey, Amara." She made a sound that was not a word, just a sound, something compressed and involuntary. And then she was past Seojun, and Marcus had his arms around her, the gun still in her hand pointed at the ground, and she pressed her face into her brother's shoulder for exactly 5 seconds. 5 seconds. Then she pulled back, looked at him, assessed the cut above his eye, his wrists, the overall condition of him, with the rapid clinical focus of a person who has been running threat assessments for the last 4 hours. I'm okay, Marcus said. I can see that. She stepped back, looked at Seojun. He looked at her. The gun was still in her hand. She was in her own doorway, in the estate she'd been moved into against her will 4 days ago, holding a weapon she'd sourced from somewhere during a perimeter breach while her son slept behind her, and she was looking at him with an expression that was not a question exactly, but was the closest thing to one she'd shown him since the hospital. Are you hurt? She said. He looked down at his right hand. The cut. No. You're bleeding. Superficially. She looked at him for another second, then she stepped back from the door, opening it wider. Come in, she said. Both of you. He stepped across the threshold. Behind them, the estate's perimeter lights came fully on, all of them, the full flood of the security system completing its reset, bathing the garden in white light that turned every shadow into its own small exposure. In that light, Seojun saw Ji Yeon's people working the garden. He saw the northeast fence line where the breach had been cut. He saw the specific way this night had arranged itself. Junho in custody somewhere on the Incheon approach road, the phone man's arm at the wrong angle in a cold room, 3 back operators contained in the garden, Marcus Bell alive, his sons asleep, Amara beside him with a weapon she'd sourced from his own security staff when she needed it. And somewhere in the main house, Elder Kang Byung-hak was asleep in the meeting room, or in his car, or in his bed in Jongno, and did not know yet that the driver in Seongbuk had talked. Tomorrow, Seojun was going to walk into a room with that man. He was going to walk in with everything, the driver's statement, the Junho connection, the operational timeline, the financial trail that Ji Yeon's report had begun to sketch, and that Sang-chul would finish by morning. I was going to walk in with all of it, and he was going to end something that had been built on the assumption that the Kong family was a resource to be managed, rather than a bloodline to be answered to. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, he stepped through the east wing door, and the door closed behind him, and somewhere down the corridor his sons were breathing in the dark, and he stood in the hallway for a moment and let himself feel the full weight of the night settling into his body. The cold water, the cut on his palm, the particular exhaustion that comes not from physical effort, but from the sustained cost of caring whether you survive. He had not felt that in a long time. The caring whether you survive part. Amara appeared at the end of the hallway, Marcus beside her, and she looked at Seojun standing there with his wet clothes and his bleeding hand, and she said, "There's a first aid kit in the bathroom. Don't make me come find you." He almost said something. He went and found the bathroom instead, and sat on the edge of the tub, and pressed a cloth against his palm, and listened to the estate settle around him. The perimeter lights, the footsteps of Ji Yeon's people in the garden, the distant sound of his sons, the low voice of Marcus saying something that made Amara exhale in a way that was almost a laugh. In the main house, Elder Kang Byung-hak did not know yet what the morning was bringing him. Seojun pressed the cloth against his hand and waited for dawn. Dawn came in gray and quiet over the Kang estate. Not the dramatic kind of dawn that announces itself, just the slow, reluctant lightening of a sky that had been dark for too long. The kind that arrives without permission and asks nothing of you except that you notice it. Seojun noticed it from the bathroom floor where he had fallen asleep sitting against the tub at some point after 3 a.m. with the cloth still wrapped around his hand and his back against the cold porcelain and his legs stretched out on the tile. He woke up because his phone buzzed. Sangchul. 6 words. Full package ready. Your call on timing. He looked at those 6 words for a moment, looked at the window, where the gray was becoming something slightly less gray. Looked at his hand. The cloth had dried against the cut, which meant the bleeding had stopped, which was one thing working as it should. He stood up, slowly. His back announced its opinion of the tile floor. He ran cold water over his face, avoided the mirror for approximately 3 seconds, then looked at it because he'd learned a long time ago that avoiding information was the most expensive habit a person could have. He looked tired. He looked like someone who had pulled himself out of 11-degree water and run an extraction operation and come home to a perimeter breach and sat on a bathroom floor for 3 hours. He looked specifically like a man who was about to walk into the most important room of his life. He changed into dry clothes from the small wardrobe he'd had moved to the East Wing 2 days ago. Dark trousers, a gray shirt, no jacket. He thought about the jacket and decided against it. He did not want to look like he'd prepared. He wanted to look like what he was, someone who had been awake all night and was walking in anyway. He went into the kitchen. Amara was already there. She was standing at the counter with both hands around a mug of coffee, looking out the small window over the sink at the garden, where Ji Yeon's people had spent the night restoring order, and where, in the early light, the northeast fence line was visible. The cut section still present, flagged with a piece of orange tape by whoever had done the damage assessment. She was wearing a loose shirt and sweatpants, and her hair was pulled back, and she looked like someone who had also not slept much, which they both knew, and neither of them mentioned it. She heard him come in. She didn't turn around yet. She reached to the side and pulled a second mug down from the cabinet and filled it from the press on the counter and set it at the edge within reach. Then she went back to holding her own mug with both hands and looking at the garden. He picked up the coffee, stood beside her at the counter, not quite shoulder to shoulder, close enough. They stood like that for almost a full minute. "The boys," he said, "still asleep. Marcus is in with them." A pause. He insisted. "Is he? He's fine. He'll have a headache for a week and a story he's going to tell at every family event for the rest of his life." She turned the mug slightly in her hands. "He also spent 40 minutes last night telling me you were—" She stopped, selected something. "Competent. High praise. From Marcus it is." She finally turned and looked at him. In the early light, without the intensity of the previous night's stakes pressing on everything, her face was just her face, tired and precise, and containing things he had never been given the full vocabulary for. For Sangchul called the estate line. He said you'd have a package ready. Yes. Elder Kang Byung-hak. He looked at her. How long have you known? She was quiet for a moment. I suspected after the first Seong faction report came in. The operation was too structured, too insulated. Seong Taejun is political, but he's not a builder. Someone else built it. She looked out the window again. Elder Kang has been managing the Osung organization's internal succession for 30 years. He builds things. He builds them so they can't be traced back, and then he stands in the room and watches them work. She paused. He was the one who suggested I attend the annual council dinner the year we married. I thought it was an olive branch. It was assessment, Seojun said. He wanted to know what I knew and how I thought. She took a sip of her coffee. I'm going to assume that dinner is why he eventually decided I was more threat than asset. He stood with that. The specific weight of it. The old man at his father's funeral, holding his hand. The 7 years of council dinners and policy discussions and quiet authoritative counsel. The assumption of loyalty so foundational that Seo-jun had never placed it in the question column. I need to meet him this morning, Seo-jun said, before he knows that Cho In-jin has been moved and before Junho has been formally processed. The window where I have all the information and he has none is narrow. I know. She set her mug down. I'm coming. Amara, I'm coming, she said again, without heat, without argument, just the flat finality of someone stating a fact about themselves. He built an operation around the assumption that I'm a variable he can control through you. I want to be in the room when he finds out what I actually am. She held his gaze. And before you say it, Ji-yeon stays with the boys, Sang-chul's deputy stays on the perimeter, and Marcus, who has apparently decided he lives here now, will be in the East Wing, with 4 of your people and a door code he will not give to anyone. He looked at her for a long moment. All right, he said. Well, the call to Elder Kong Byung-hak was made at 7:15 a.m. Seo-jun's voice on the phone was the specific variety of controlled that the old man would have recognized as operational focus, the voice Seo-jun used when things were moving and he needed information consolidated. He said there were developments from the previous night that required the Elder Council's senior presence. He said the Signeal situation had produced intelligence. He said he needed an hour. Elder Kong Byung-hak agreed, as he always agreed, with the gracious availability of a man who has made it his life's work to be in the room where things happen. He arrived at the main house study at 8 a.m. precisely. He was wearing a charcoal suit with a dark tie, which meant he'd dressed formally, which meant he'd treated this as a council matter, which meant he'd spent the night assuming Seo-jun would come to him in need of guidance, rather than with a loaded room. He walked into the study and stopped. Seo-jun was at the desk. Sang-chul was by the window. Ji-yeon, who had been up all night and showed it in the particular stripped efficiency of her expression, was at the side wall. And Amara was seated in the chair to the left of the desk, in the chair that council members used when they came to Seo-jun for decisions rather than the other way around. Elder Kong Byung-hak looked at the room. His face processed it in the way of a man who has read rooms his entire life, quickly, internally, with nothing visible on the surface. Then he settled. A slight shift of his shoulders, composure reasserted. Seo-jun, he said, I wasn't aware this would be a full meeting. It's not a full meeting, Seo-jun said. Sit down. A beat. The old man sat. Seo-jun placed 3 documents on the desk and slid them across. He did not explain them. He let the old man read, because the old man was going to read them regardless, and pretending otherwise was a waste of everyone's time. Kong Byung-hak read. His eyes moved across the first document, Cho In-jin's statement, with the deliberate pace of a man who is not going to let his reading speed tell anyone what he's feeling. He turned to the second, the operational timeline, compiled by Sang-chul from the communications trace, showing the planning architecture of the Baek contract across 17 days. He turned to the third, the financial trail, 6 transactions through 3 shell entities that Ji-yeon's network had mapped overnight, each one connecting to a holding company registered in the Cayman Islands that connected, at its root, to an account that drew from a fund administered under Elder Kong Byung-hak's personal legal structure. He finished reading, set the third document down, aligned its edges with the other 2 precisely. Then he looked up. Well, he said, just that. Well. With the equanimity of someone who has prepared for a version of this moment for years and has now arrived at it and is committed to playing it out with dignity, if nothing else. 30 years, Seo-jun said. Yes. You were managing my father the same way. Not a question. Elder Kong Byung-hak tilted his head slightly, the smallest possible acknowledgement. Your father was a brilliant man with specific limitations, as are all brilliant men. And me. You were a different calculation. He said it without apology, the tone of a strategist describing a strategic reality. You are more capable than your father in certain respects, but you chose a wife that the organization couldn't absorb, and you chose her because some part of you wanted a variable you couldn't fully predict. He glanced at Amara. brief, assessing. I underestimated the variable. Amara said nothing. She was looking at the old man with an expression that was almost clinical, the specific look of someone who is cataloging rather than reacting, storing information rather than spending it. The paternity campaign, Seo-jun said. The Bayek contract. The Signal operation. Walk me through the decision to bring in an outside syndicate rather than using the Seong faction's own operators. Kang Byung-hak regarded him. You already know why. I want to hear your version. A pause. Then, the Seong faction is useful as a vehicle and disposable as an actor. If the operation traced back to Seong Taejun, the council would absorb the scandal internally and the organization would continue. Seong understood his role in this. He was your cutout. He was a useful man who wanted more than he had earned, a common combination. The old man's hands rested folded on his knee, perfectly still. The Beck Syndicate was external enough to provide distance and connected enough to move quickly. It was a practical decision. The practical decision, Amara said, and it was the first time she'd spoken in the room, and her voice was so level that it took a second to register as the thing it was. The specific, low, controlled register of a woman who has been listening to a man explain the logistics of an operation designed to eliminate her and has arrived at the end of her patience with clinical detachment. Involved a shooter on a scaffolding outside a window where my 5-day-old sons were sleeping. The room was very quiet. Elder Kang Byung-hak looked at her. He looked at her the way he'd looked at the documents, steadily, without hurry, committing the reality of her to whatever internal architecture he used to organize the world. The shooter was a pressure mechanism. The intention was not, "Don't," she said. "Don't qualify it." He stopped. "You placed a laser sight on a room with 2 infants in it," she said. "The intention behind that is not something I'm interested in hearing explained." The old man looked at her for a long moment. And then, this was the part Seo-jun had not anticipated, something crossed his face that was not quite remorse but was in the territory adjacent to it. The expression of a man who has been in the business of strategic calculation for so long that he has occasionally lost the ability to see the distance between a plan and its human content, and who is now having that distance described to him in a voice that does not give him the option of not seeing it. "No," he said finally. "I won't." Seo-jun pulled the documents back. "Here's what happens now," he said. "Your resignation from the Elder Council will be effective today. It will be framed as a health matter. I'm told you have a cardiac history, which makes it plausible. The financial holdings connected to your Cayman structure will be transferred to a trust administered by the organization within 30 days. The specifics of last night do not become organizational record." Kang Byung-hak looked at him. "And in exchange, the specifics of last night don't become something else." Seo-jun held his gaze. "You know what the alternative looks like. You've administered it yourself twice in the past decade. I have a full record of both instances." The room was very quiet again, the particular quiet of an ultimatum in the moment before it's accepted or refused. Kang Byung-hak unfolded his hands, placed them flat on his knees, looked at the desk for a moment, at the place where the documents had been. "Your father," he said finally, "would have had me killed." "Yes," Seo-jun said, "he would have." "And you?" "I'm not my father." He said it without drama, just fact. "I'm also not interested in spending the next year managing the consequences of your death inside the organization. You have people who would require managing, and I have better uses for the next year." Kang Byung-hak looked at Amara again. One more time. Something in the look was different from the first time. Less assessment, more the specific expression of a man acknowledging that he misjudged the thing he was looking at. "You placed the offshore assets under a trust," he said to her, "during your pregnancy." "Yes," she said. "Which assets?" She told him. The number was specific, and the holdings were specific, and the legal architecture was specific. And as she described it, Kang Byung-hak's expression moved through several stages before arriving at something that, in another context, might have been professional appreciation. "When?" he said. "Month 5, she said. "I had Christine Park structure it over 6 weeks. It's airtight. The board of the Jeju Holding Company requires my co-signature for any transfer above 50 million. Yes." She held his gaze. "I've been your heir's wife for 3 years, Elder Kang. I had time to learn what was worth protecting." He sat with that. The study was very still. Sangchul by the window, Ji Yeon at the wall, all of them present and none of them moving. The particular stillness of witnesses. Then Elder Kong Byung-hak stood up. He straightened his jacket. He looked at Seo Jun. I'll have the resignation to the council administrator by noon. Good, Seo Jun said. He looked one final time at Amara. The look had several things in it, none of which were simple, and she met it without blinking. Then he turned and walked to the door and let himself out, and his footsteps moved down the main house corridor with the measured, unhurried pace of a man who has been in this organization for 30 years and intends to leave it standing. The door at the end of the corridor opened and closed. Sangchul exhaled. Ji Yeon moved from the wall and began gathering the document copies she'd prepared for her own records. Seojun sat at the desk and looked at his hands, the left one fine, the right one with the dried cut along the palm, and didn't do anything for a moment. Just sat in his father's chair in his grandfather's study and let the morning settle into the silence that was left after something large had moved through. Amara stood up. She picked up the original documents from the desk. She aligned their edges the same way the old man had aligned them, precisely, and set them back down. Junho, she said. Sangchul will process him this afternoon, Seo Jun said. Full statement. The Busan broker connection, the Seong coordination, all of it. He paused. He'll be removed from the organization. His family. He stopped. His family didn't do this, Amar said. No. Then make sure they're not part of the consequence. He looked at her. That's generous. It's not generous, she said. His daughters are 8 and 11. They didn't make their father's choices. She picked up her coffee mug, which she'd brought from the East Wing and which was now cold. What they get to live with is already enough. He nodded. All right. Seon Taejun's formal removal from the Elder Council took longer than Byung-hak's, not because he resisted, but because the administrative complexity of extracting someone who had embedded himself in 3 committees and 2 financial review boards required careful surgery rather than a single incision. Seojun spent the better part of the next 4 days in a series of meetings that he would have described, if asked, as the most tedious necessary work of his professional life. Documentation, board notifications, the careful political management of a narrative that needed to read as an internal restructuring rather than a purge. He was good at tedious, necessary work. He had never enjoyed it, but the capacity for it was something his father had insisted on, and that Seojun had resented, and was now grateful for in the specific way you become grateful for the things you were forced to learn. Amara spent those 4 days in the East Wing, but the East Wing changed. She asked, not requested, asked, whether the glass corridor connecting it to the main house could be kept unsealed. He unsealed it. She began moving through the main house in the mornings, initially with Ji Yeon's people, and then increasingly without them, learning the layout of a building she had been kept peripheral to for 3 years. He watched her do this from a distance and said nothing, which he recognized as a form of respect that he should have extended years earlier and was extending now without being asked to. Marcus stayed for 11 days. He was, as advertised, a school teacher. He had the specific quality of someone who has spent years managing 20 competing needs simultaneously and has developed an unshakable patience as a professional survival mechanism. He held Kai for hours at a time and talked to him in a low, even voice about things Kai had no ability to understand. Baseball statistics, the best route from Atlanta to Chattanooga, the particular injustice of a certain school cafeteria's pizza policy. Kai appeared to find this deeply satisfactory. He and Seojun had one real conversation, on the 8th day, in the main house kitchen at midnight, both of them making separate attempts at a meal and ending up at the same table by default. Marcus ate for a while without speaking. Then he said, "She used to call me when things were bad. Middle of the night sometimes. She never said anything specific. She'd just talk about other things, her work, whatever. But I knew." He didn't look up from his food. "She stopped calling like that about a year ago." Seojun said nothing. "I thought it meant things were better," Marcus said. "Then I figured out it meant she'd stopped expecting someone else to notice." He let that sit in the room without expanding on it. Seojun said, "I know." Marcus looked at him then, the specific look of a younger sibling who has spent a long time deciding whether or not to trust someone and has not entirely finished deciding. "She built all of it herself," he said. "The company, the security, the legal structure. While she was pregnant, in a country that isn't hers, in a marriage that wasn't working, she did all of that by herself. I know, Seojun said again. I'm not telling you because I want an apology, Marcus said. I'm telling you because I want to make sure you understand what it cost her. That kind of a loan has a cost. It doesn't go away because things got better. He went back to his food. She'll be okay. She's always okay. But okay and whole are different things, and the second one takes longer. Seojun sat with that for the rest of the evening and for several mornings after. The Osung dynasty's annual gala had been scheduled for 6 weeks after the twins' birth, a fixed date, set 18 months in advance. The kind of event that did not move because rescheduling it would have communicated something to every faction and affiliated organization watching the calendar. Seojun had spent the weeks leading up to it managing the restructured council, installing 2 new elders whose positions were based on demonstrated competence rather than historical allegiance, and conducting the particular exhausting diplomacy of convincing people that the organization was stable without telling them what had made it temporarily unstable. He had also, in the 2 weeks before the gala, done something he had not done in 3 years of marriage. He had asked Amara what she wanted. Not about the gala specifically, about the organization, about her position in it, about what the next year looked like from where she was standing, with 2 sons who were growing with the impossible speed of infants, and a legal structure she'd built in secret, and a husband who had spent most of their marriage treating her like a variable rather than a partner. She had looked at him for a long moment when he asked, like she was checking whether the question was real. Then she'd told him, specifically, methodically, without performance. She wanted access to the financial review board. She wanted to understand the legitimate business holdings, the construction arm, the import infrastructure, the hospitality investments. Not as a spouse with peripheral visibility, but as someone with actual operational input. She wanted Christine Park formally recognized as her legal representation in any matter touching the organization. She wanted Jian and Kai to grow up knowing what their father did, and making an informed choice at some future point about whether they wanted to be part of it. He had listened to all of it, had taken notes, which seemed to surprise her, had then spent 4 days working through the structural changes required and had come back with a proposal that addressed each point specifically. She had read the proposal. She had changed 3 things. Her changes were better than his original language on all 3 points, which he told her, and which she received without false modesty. Just a nod, the acknowledgement of someone who knows the quality of their own work. The gala was at the Osung Tower's 40th floor, the same building where Seojun's father had hosted the same event for 20 years, a space that smelled like imported flowers and the specific expensive air of a room that has been prepared for powerful people. 700 guests. Every significant relationship the organization had built or was building, present and dressed, and performing the social arithmetic that these events required. Seojun arrived with Amara. Not alongside her, not preceding her, not with her following at the choreographed distance that organizational wives maintained at these events. With her. Directly beside her, his hand at the small of her back for exactly the length of time it took to walk through the main entrance and into the room, and then his hand at his side because she didn't need managing and he'd stopped trying. The room noticed. The room always noticed everything. That was what these rooms were for. He watched the noticing move through the space like current through water, faces turning and turning away, and the murmur adjusting its frequency slightly before recovering. Amara noticed the noticing and did not acknowledge it, which was exactly right. She wore dark green. She had the twins' photograph in a small frame in her evening bag, which he knew because she'd shown it to him before they left. Kai and Jian, 10 weeks old, both awake, and both somehow managing to look simultaneously like her and like him, which still struck him as a biological improbability that he was glad was true. She had shown him the photograph and said, "In case I need to remember why we're doing this," with the particular dry tone she deployed when a moment was too heavy to carry without a counterweight. He had taken the frame and looked at his sons for a moment and then handed it back. He understood why she needed the counterweight. They moved through the room doing the work the room required. Conversations, introductions, the careful maintenance of the relationships that the organization's legitimate future depended on. Amara was better at this than he was. He had known it abstractly before and understood it concretely now.
watching her move from conversation to conversation with a facility that was not performance, just the genuine interest of someone who finds people legible and finds that legibility interesting. An hour into the evening, during the dinner service, she leaned slightly toward him and said quietly, "Third table from the left, the woman in the blue." He didn't look immediately. "Who?"
Her name is Dr. Shin Hyun-suk. She runs the biomedical investment division of Seong Taijun's former partner firm. She's been approached twice in the past month about switching her board affiliation. A pause. She's also the person who introduced Choi Min-soo to the press contact who held the story. He looked now. The woman in the blue was 40-something, contained, with the specific wariness of someone at a party where they are not sure they should be. She cooperated with Seong under pressure, Amara said, not ideology. She has 2 patents in dispute and he had leverage. How do you know this? Christine, she said simply. She's been building a picture of the Seong network's non-organizational contacts for 3 weeks. She reached for her water glass. I thought we should know who was pressured versus who was complicit. The distinction matters for what we do next. He looked at his wife, at the complete quiet architecture of what she'd built while he'd been managing council resignations and security rotations. The picture she'd been building in parallel, in the margins, with Christine's help and her own methodical intelligence. You've been running an intelligence operation, he said. I've been protecting my family, she said. The operational vocabulary is yours. He almost smiled. What do you want to do with Dr. Shin? Have someone reach out next week. Not from the organization, from an independent investment group Christine can front. The patents dispute can be resolved through a different legal channel. Once it is, she'll be a willing informant on every Seong-adjacent connection she has. She took a sip of water. She's not an enemy. She's someone who got caught. Those are the most useful people in any room. He looked at her. You would have been extraordinary at this. She looked back at him. I am extraordinary at this, she said. I've been doing it for 3 years with a fraction of the resources. He had nothing to say to that except the truth, which was, yes. I know, he said. She held his gaze for a moment. Something in it was measuring, the way she measured everything. Not testing him, just taking an accurate reading. I know you know, she said, and went back to the room. The attempt on his life came at 9:47 p.m., which was late enough in the evening that the champagne had done its work on the room's collective vigilance. It was not a shooter, not a vehicle, not anything as direct as the previous weeks had offered. It was a glass of Barolo placed in front of him by a server he didn't recognize, which he wouldn't have noticed except that Amara put her hand on his arm at the precise moment he reached for it. He stopped. She was looking at the server, the man's hands, specifically, the way the glass had been set down. The slight hesitation before release. The server walked away. Amara's hand was still on his arm. He did not reach for the glass. Instead, he found Ji-yeon with his eyes. She was at the perimeter of the room, dressed for the event in a way that made her look like a guest, and moved in a way that prevented anyone from believing it, and gave her a specific look that meant the glass and meant quietly and meant now. Ji-yeon moved. What the toxicology later confirmed was a compound that, in the quantity present, would have produced cardiac symptoms indistinguishable from natural causes in a man under sustained stress. The kind of confirmation that arrives on paper and reads like a clinical document and sits in the stomach like something much heavier. The server was detained in the kitchen corridor. He lasted 40 minutes before he gave a name. Not Elder Kong Byung-hak, whose resignation had already removed him from operational capacity, not Elder Seong Taijun, who was in the process of being dismantled. A third name. Someone they hadn't mapped yet. Someone in the outer ring of the Seong network who had decided, independently, that the restructuring of the council represented a threat they couldn't afford to let complete. Seo-jun sat in the small room off the main kitchen where Ji-yeon's people had taken the server, and he looked at the name on the screen Sang-chul showed him, and he thought about what Amara had said about the woman in the blue. She's not an enemy, she's someone who got caught. This man was not that. This man had made a specific choice, and the choice had to produce a specific consequence, because without that architecture, the whole structure of what Seo-jun was building was theoretical. He made the call he needed to make. He made it in 2 sentences. He went back to the gala. Amara looked at him when he returned. Read his face. Handled, he said. She looked at him for a moment longer than that word required. What she was reading in his face was not just the word, but the weight of it. The cost of certain decisions, the particular kind of authority that produces outcomes no one pretends are comfortable. Okay, she said. Not approval, not condemnation, just okay. The acknowledgement of someone who has chosen to be in this world with both eyes open and who is going to live with that choice the same way she'd lived with every other hard choice, directly. He sat beside her and the evening continued, and neither of them spoke about it again that night. The months that followed were the hardest work Seojun had ever done that did not involve physical danger, which was a fact he reflected on with some regularity and found useful. The legitimate business restructuring consumed him in the way that complex problems consume people who are genuinely suited to them, fully, almost pleasurably, with the specific satisfaction of watching a system become more coherent than it was. He removed 4 directors from the construction arm on evidence of internal diversion that Ji Yeon's continuing intelligence work had surfaced. He brought in 2 external consultants from the hospitality sector to assess the hotel and restaurant holdings. He initiated a formal legal review of the import infrastructure that had been operating in gray zones for so long that the people inside it had forgotten they were gray. Each of these things produced friction. Each piece of friction required management. The management was exhausting and unglamorous and produced no dramatic moments, just a steady accumulation of decisions that were slightly better than the ones they replaced. Amara sat on the financial review board. The first meeting, 3 of the 4 remaining elder council members had looked at the empty chair beside Seojun with a very specific expression. She had walked in, sat down, opened her folio, and begun reviewing the Q3 numbers before anyone else had fully settled, and the meeting had proceeded because there was nothing else for it to do. By the 3rd meeting, 2 of the 4 had begun directing financial questions to her. By the 6th, all of them had. Not because she performed authority or demanded it, because she was better at the numbers than anyone else in the room, and she made the numbers useful in a way that people who are good at things make them useful, by using them to answer actual questions rather than to produce the appearance of rigor. Seojun watched this happen from beside her and said nothing, which continued to be the most useful form of respect he had available to offer. Kai and Jen were 4 months old when Seojun found her in the garden. It was a Saturday afternoon, one of the first genuinely warm days of spring, the kind where the estate's grounds recovered their own particular quality, the deliberate beauty of a space maintained by people who understood what it was for. She was sitting on the stone bench near the east wing wall, in the patch of afternoon light that hit that spot between 2 and 4, both boys in the carrier system in front of her. They'd grown into it, both heavier now, both loud in the particular specific way they each were, Kai with his periodic declarative sounds, and Jian with his concentrated silences broken by sudden interest in whatever was near. She was talking to them, both of them, alternating, in the low, even voice she always used. English with Marcus, Korean with Seojun's staff, a fluid mixture with the boys that moved between both languages without appearing to notice the transitions. She was telling them about a building she'd worked in once in Chicago, the specific quality of its elevators, the way the lobby smelled in winter. Not a story with a point, just the texture of a life, offered to 2 people who would not remember it, but who were, right now, listening with the total investment of infants for whom everything is new. He stood at the garden entrance for a moment before she heard him. Kai looked up and found him. That had started recently. The directed attention, the recognition. Something about it was enormous in a way Seojun had no appropriate scale for. The baby looked at him and made a sound that was not a word but was directed at him specifically, and Seojun crossed the garden and sat down on the other end of the bench. Amara adjusted slightly, making room. "Chicago," he said. "I was telling them about the winter there." She looked down at Jian, who was examining his own fist with the intensity of a researcher. "The way cold works in a city with that much water, it comes in sideways." He thought about Seoul winters, the particular horizontal quality of the wind off the Han. "I know the phenomenon." "I know you do." She looked at him briefly, then back at the boys. "Sangchul's weekly report." "Yes." "The Busan connection." "Closed," he said, "as of yesterday. The broker has been removed from operation." He paused. "Permanently." She nodded.
She had stopped asking for details in that specific vocabulary, which was not avoidance. It was the informed choice of someone who understands what the details mean and has decided that she will make her peace with the architecture without requiring the blueprints. "Marcus called," she said. "I know. He called me too." She looked at him. "He called you." "To tell me the school's spring concert is May 17th and he wants to know if we can make it to Atlanta." He paused. "He spent 6 minutes telling me about the school's spring concert. I have not been to a school spring concert in my adult life." "He invited you specifically." "He said, and I'm reporting this accurately, that his class is doing a piece that requires someone to play triangle and that it is, quote, chaotic in a way I would respect." Amara's face did the thing it did when she was keeping the laugh internal, but not entirely succeeding. He's not wrong. Third graders with percussion instruments is genuinely chaotic. I told him we'd consider it. She looked at him. We. I used the word we. He held her gaze. It seemed accurate. She held his gaze for a moment. The afternoon light was doing specific things to the garden. Long shadows, the quality of warmth that arrives, and then is immediately nostalgic for itself. Giant had lost interest in his fist and was now looking at the sky with the concentrated expression of a person encountering infinity for the first time and finding it plausible. "I haven't forgiven you," she said. "I know. I mean that specifically. The hospital room. What you said, how you said it, who you said it in front of." She was looking at the garden, not at him. "I'm not going to tell you I've let it go, because I haven't. That kind of moment, you don't just put it somewhere and leave it." "No," he said, "you don't." "But I'm here," she said. "Not because I've decided the betrayal doesn't matter. Because I've decided you matter, and those are different things, and I need you to understand the difference." He thought about Marcus in the kitchen. Okay and whole are different things. "I understand the difference," he said. She looked at him then, directly. The afternoon in her face, both boys between them, the garden around them with its recent history of breach and restoration. "I know things I didn't know a year ago," she said, "about what you're capable of. Not just the bad, both." She paused. "I need you to keep being the person you've been for the past 4 months. Not perfectly. I'm not asking for perfect. Perfect is a performance, and I'm done with performances." She looked at Kai, who was falling asleep in the carrier with his mouth open and his fist against his chin. "I'm asking for consistent, for real, for someone who picks up the phone when it matters and puts the boys first when it matters and tells me the truth when it's inconvenient, because that's what I've been doing for this entire marriage." "Yes," he said. "That's all you have." "Yes." "Yes isn't nothing," he said. "With some people, yes is the hardest thing." She looked at him. Something in the look shifted, not softening, not that, but something that had been held tight, releasing slightly. The specific adjustment of a person who has been carrying something at full tension and is allowing, carefully, a millimeter of slack. She reached over, put her hand on top of his. Just that, on the back of his hand, warm from the afternoon sun. Not holding, just placed. He didn't move. Kai slept. Jin found something new in the sky and directed his full, uncomprehending attention at it. The garden held the afternoon. "May 17th, she said. "May 17th, he said. "We should go." "Yes." "You're going to have to sit through 45 minutes of recorder music. I'm aware. And Marcus's class doing triangle. He made it sound survivable. He was lying to get you there." She almost smiled. "He does that." "I know," Seojun said. "I figured that out about 10 minutes into the call." She looked at him. "And you said yes anyway." "He's the uncle of my sons," Seojun said. "He spent 40 minutes in a cold room in Incheon wearing a baseball hat and came out the other side still reasonable. That earned something." This time she did smile. Small, specific, the real version. The one he'd seen twice before in 3 years and had spent a significant amount of time since then understanding was the version that cost her something to give. He looked at it and understood he was being trusted with it. The afternoon moved. The boys breathed in their particular ways. The garden held the light for as long as the light was available, and then the shadows lengthened and the warmth went out of the air by degrees, the way warmth always goes, gradually, then all at once. And then you're reaching for something to put around yourself and noticing how much colder it is than you expected,
and how the warmth was more than you knew while you were inside it. Amara reached for the light jacket she'd left on the bench and shrugged into it one-handed, the other arm curved around the carrier. Seojun reached across and helped, not taking over, just holding the sleeve open so the motion was easier. She finished and settled and looked at him. "Come in when you're ready," she said. She stood, adjusted the carrier, and walked back toward the east wing door. He watched her go, the measured, unhurried walk of someone who has been in a fight that lasted years and has come out the other side not unscathed but intact, which is a different and more durable thing. The door closed. Seojun sat alone in the garden with the evening coming on, and his hands in his lap and the distant sounds of the estate around him. Security rotation in the far perimeter. A window opening in the main house, somewhere inside the muffled sound of Jian waking up and announcing himself. He sat there and did not make any particular resolution. He didn't tell himself a story about the man he was going to be, because the man you tell yourself stories about is never quite the man who shows up in the actual morning. He just sat with the weight of the previous months, what had been broken and what had been built, and what the difference was between the two, and let it be as complicated as it was. Then he stood up and went inside. The east wing hallway was lit and warm. Amara was in the nursery. He could hear her voice, low and even, the same voice she'd used to tell Kai and Jian about Chicago, about elevators, about the lateral quality of lakeside winter wind. Not a story with a point, just the ongoing texture of a life, offered to the people who would inherit it. He stood outside the nursery door. He did not knock. He'd started knocking, 2 months ago, without announcement, just as the moment required. He knocked now. "Come in," she said. He opened the door. Jian was in her arms, awake and emphatic about something, his fists moving in the agitated way that meant pre-hunger. Kai was in the crib, asleep with his mouth open, and his absolute conviction that the world would remain suitable while he was unconscious. Amara was standing by the window with the late light behind her, and she looked at Seojun in the doorway, and then looked at her son, and then back at him. "You can take him," she said, "if you want." He crossed the room, took Jian from her arms. The specific weight of him, the warmth, the slight acceleration of protest that immediately slowed when position changed, the way Jian's fists opened and then closed again, finding something to grip. His son's hand closed around his finger with the complete and indiscriminate trust of someone who has not yet learned that trust is a decision rather than a reflex. He would learn. Both of them would learn, and Seojun would be the evidence they used to make the calculation, and he was going to try, every specific day, to be evidence worth using. He stood at the window with his son. Amara sat on the nursing chair nearby and watched Kai sleep with the expression of someone who has been through the kind of year that reorders everything and is still deciding what order the new version of things belongs in. Not finished deciding, not in a hurry to be finished. The estate settled around them. The light finished what it had been doing and gave the room over to the softer register of early evening. Outside, the garden was quiet. The perimeter held. He held his son and said nothing, and did not need to. The empire remained. But the empire was not, finally, the point.